The Shortcut by Brendan Bozeman. Philip lived in the perfect place. It was close enough to school to walk, but also far enough away that it wasn't a short walk. Yet it wasn't so far away that you had to take the bus. In practical terms, walking made sense for him and his two best friends, Cole and Eli. If they wanted to meet up after school, it was better to walk because, otherwise, the rule was they would have to get dropped off at their house and nowhere else. That meant they would have to go all the way home on the bus and then walk back to each other's houses. Also, factoring in the time it took to get checked in on the bus and wait around for that one last kid, it took about the same time to walk as it did to ride. But it also gave Philip a sense of pride. His parents had walked to school as kids, and he didn't want to be one of those modern, overprotected kids he kept hearing about. Cole and Eli walked less often, and over the years, Philip got the reputation of the kid who always walked, rain, shine, or snow, and he nurtured that status. He wasn't good at sports or school, so he needed something to distinguish himself. The one thing he wished was that he could cut through the woods that was between his walking route and the school. There was a sign on a gate saying, "No entry," and his parents had forbidden him from using it because, quote, strangers could be anywhere in that park. By the time he was in 6th grade, he couldn't help looking down at the gate every time he and his friends passed by. The gate was always closed and padlocked, but it only extended across the path. Nothing would stop someone from walking around it. The path had some signs of being trodden, but it was overgrown. He could see that it turned into a decaying boardwalk farther in as it went into a swampy area. A tree had fallen over the trail some ways in and had never been removed. One day in early spring, as he, Cole, and Eli walked past, he said, "You want to go through there?" "I don't know," said Eli. "We better not." "Yeah," said Cole. "We're not supposed to go in there." "Come on, why not?" "You know," said Cole. "Strangers. No one goes in there." "Oh, yeah. Stranger danger." "Seriously, guys, I don't think there are any pervs hanging out in there at 7:30 in the morning. Why would they even bother if kids never go in there?" "Exactly," said Eli. "That place is messed up." "I don't think you were listening, Eli," said Philip. "I bet strangers aren't the real reason." Eli said, "My dad told me the real reason." "What?" "A kid got killed there like 20 years ago. They thought it was some homeless guy, but they never caught him." "Sounds made up to me, Eli. Parents always say stuff like that." "I never heard that anyway. What about you, Cole?" "No, but I don't know. Sometimes they keep things from you so they won't upset you. Like, you may not realize this, Philip, but Santa does not really exist." Philip sighed. "Come on, let's go," said Cole. Philip wanted to prove a point. What point exactly, he did not know. But he started walking in. It was probably at least half because they were against it, and half because it would show he was a little braver than they were. Also, he felt some fear, and it encouraged him. It was exciting. He went around the gate and toward the fallen tree. "You're really going?" said Eli. "Watch this." "Watch this are the first words of every story that ends in the emergency room," said Cole. Philip crouched under the tree and then turned around to say, "It's fine." Cole and Eli looked at each other but did not move. "I'll see you on the other side," said Philip, waving his hand. With only the first buds of spring bulging on the branches, the woods felt barren, and it was dead silent, as if it was waiting to see what he would do. The path was muddy and overgrown with leafless brambles. The boardwalk stopped and started, covering only the wettest areas. After a short while, he saw a log near the path. Nearby was the black mark of a fire and some empty beer cans and cigarette butts. The cans were discolored and the butts flaky and old-looking. Later, he came across a path leading to the right. All he could see there were more trees and what looked like a pond. Maybe the path went around the pond. Also, he could see something blue well off into the woods. He couldn't tell what it was, or even tell how far away it was. The boardwalk got worse. In one place, all the boards had rotted, and the 2 logs were slippery. It was impossible to get across without losing his footing and soaking his feet. It became continuous as it got to be swampier, and it zigged and zagged as it sought the solidest parts of the muddy ground. There were bare trees growing out of the water, and rushes were starting to grow. Finally, he reached the other side, where a bank went up steeply, and at the top he could see he was almost at the school fields. There was a wide stream there, and he had to go along the stream for 100 feet or so before he found a way across. He stayed inside the trees as long as he could, and came out where the main driveway met the school. He sat down on the front steps. Fortunately, he had his gym clothes that day, and he switched his socks. After a few minutes, Cole and Eli appeared. They ran over, asking him what had happened. It was cool, kind of abandoned, but I saved like 5 minutes. Was anyone in there? Said Cole. No. You could tell people go in sometimes. I saw like beer cans and stuff. Awesome, said Eli. The bell rang and they had to get to class. At lunch, Philip described in better detail what he had seen. I'm going back that way this afternoon, too. Cole said, but don't you think there will be strangers there? You said they wouldn't be there in the morning, but it's going to be fine. No one will be there. When was the last time someone got kidnapped around here? Well, that's what I mean, said Cole. Let's see. How did you put it this morning? Oh, yeah. Maybe no one gets kidnapped because no one goes in there. That's not what I said. If you're too scared to go in, I'm not going to make you. But I think you're being paranoid. That afternoon, Philip was surprised to see Eli come up to him, ready to go. I figured it'd be safer if I came along, he said, leaning down to check his laces. Philip rolled his eyes. He saw Cole going toward the bus area. How about you? You gonna come? Cole turned, but hesitated. He looked back and forth between the other two and the bus. Fine, I'll go too. Philip was glad to have the company. It actually did seem less intimidating with them. He did think Cole had a point, that if there were going to be strangers, it would probably be in the afternoon. His friends were still apprehensive, walking behind him and too close. They got to the path that branched off, and Philip told them he thought he had seen a pond down there. It was just a gray smirch amidst the trees, but they agreed it was water. Philip looked at them and nodded in the direction of the pond. Cole and Eli again looked at each other, but didn't move. Philip again just went down the path, this time without a word, and this time they followed. This path was even less well kept, and it had legions of grasping little branches and a lot of dead leaves that concealed the path. They did get to a pond, which was shaped more like a turnip than a circle. On the other side, the pond didn't really have a shoreline, but turned gradually into a marsh. It looked like the path went all the way around. Some ways down to the right, there was a no swimming sign in the water. On the far end of the pond, there was an earthen dam. They went counterclockwise around the pond, which was the shorter path to the dam. The path went along the top of it, only a foot or two above the water. Water poured into a circular concrete drain near the dam in the shape of a large funnel with small steps leading down and out of sight. Looking at that concrete hole, with water flowing calmly into blackness, set the boys on edge. They could not help thinking about floating into it like the flecks of detritus that scudded toward it. Peering over the other side of the dam, they could see that the water came out into a stream about 12 feet down. They threw sticks into this tube, which came out the other side. Eli suddenly said, "Guys, look." On the swampy side of the pond were a man and a little boy. They walked away from them, counterclockwise around the pond. "Did you see them before?" said Philip. "No," said Eli. "Maybe they were just here." "They could have been behind trees," said Cole. They both wore black clothes, so the boy who walked behind the man looked like a miniature version of him. The man turned to say something to the boy, but they could not hear it, and his black hair swung over his face. Eli ran. Seeing that, the others did too. They ran back almost to the point where the path connected again. There, Philip grabbed Eli's shoulder and said, "Stop." Cole stopped too. "Why did you run, Eli?" asked Philip. "I don't know. That guy just looked freaky. It was probably some guy with his son or something. I don't know. They looked weird." "Eli, use some common sense. Some perv isn't going to kidnap a kid and then take a walk around the pond with him." "I don't know." "Yeah," said Cole. "Who knows what they were doing?" "Have you ever seen that kid?" said Philip. Neither had, but he looked like a kindergartner, so it was no surprise they didn't know him. Just then, Philip saw the two figures again. They were coming toward them. "Guys, don't look." His friend stared at him intently. "Step to the side of the path, but don't run." They could not help looking and froze at the sight of them trudging down the path. "Just don't run," said Philip. The pair gave no indication that they even saw the boys. Their heads were down toward the path, and they continued at the same pace and without deviating. As they went past, the boys stepped off the path, and the man and the boy kept going without acknowledging them. They continued to the end of the path, went right in the direction of the school, and disappeared behind trees. They hadn't seen their faces well. The man's hair had obscured his face almost completely, and the boy had a blank expression. Their skin, they thought, was unusually white. The boys wanted to wait until they were long gone before following. "What's that blue thing?" said Eli. "I saw that this morning," said Philip. "I can't tell." No one was in the mood to investigate, so after what seemed like an hour, they picked their way cautiously back to the main path and then hurried to the gate, constantly looking behind their backs. Later that evening, Philip remembered something he hadn't noticed at the time. The path they had taken around the pond was muddy and covered with old leaves. The boys had left large black smudges as they went. But when they walked to the dam, there were no footprints. That meant the man and the boy must have gone clockwise around the pond, stopped, and retraced their steps. That seemed odd. Why wouldn't they just walk all the way around the pond in one direction? Were they afraid of meeting the boys, just as the boys had been afraid of them? That didn't make sense, though, because they had walked right past them on their way out. Philip wished he had thought to look at their footprints as they passed. The next day, Philip acted nonchalant as he went down the path again, but it took an act of will. Cole and Eli would not go with him. "We've done it once," said Cole. "We've seen it. I'll keep my sneakers clean." Eli looked at both of them with wide, vacillating eyes. Philip turned around. "Come on, guys. It was just a guy and his kid. It's a free country. Nothing bad happened." They didn't move. Philip had to follow through at that point. But he went directly to the end without going to the pond. As before, he saw no one. He avoided Cole and Eli that day, and they avoided him. On the way back, Philip went down the path to the pond a short way. He tried to see what the footprints could tell him, but they were too muddled up. He did not want to go in further, but he saw that blue thing again far behind the trees, although he did not go in to find out what it was. He also went to the fire area. This time there were footprints, one set. They entered from one side and then went back and forth repeatedly to where the fire pit was. The fire pit had been used. The beer cans seemed as old as before, but some of the cigarette butts seemed fresh. Philip's heart started beating as he viewed the area. Maybe there was a stranger in the woods. He looked around and, seeing nothing, hurried back home. But over the course of the evening, his anxiety wore off. The footprints didn't mean there was a murderer out there. It could have been a high schooler. And for that matter, how could he be sure there was really just one track? Maybe it was a guy with his girlfriend. Anyway, no one was there during the day. By the next morning, he had no trouble going down the path, and by the end of the next week, he actually enjoyed the walk and decided that the man and the boy were just that, a couple of harmless strangers who were minding their own business. The fire pit seemed to be used occasionally, and that was probably the same kind of thing. Someone was using the fire pit once in a while, nothing more. He told his friends about what he had seen, but they maintained a less optimistic attitude. "That could easily be some homeless guy, maybe more," said Eli. "What's the point of saving 5 minutes anyway?" said Cole. Philip had no success persuading them, so on Friday, he pulled out the big guns, mockery and ridicule. "You just don't want your parents to find out," said Philip. Eli responded, "No, it's just common sense. There must be a good reason for that sign." "You're still scared of some guy and a little kid," Philip said. "Mommy, don't let the kindergartners get me." That shamed Cole and Eli somewhat, but it didn't change their minds. And Philip didn't change his. In fact, he was glad they said no. He didn't mind being the brave one, so he shrugged his shoulders and went ahead. He decided that day he would go to the pond again. As he took the turn heading that way, a raw wind came up, reminding him that it was still early spring, and it started drizzling. When he got to where the dam first came into view, he was arrested by the sight of the little boy in black, sitting on a log not far from the dam. His hands were under his legs, which he kicked a little up and down. Philip walked down the path. The figure of the boy came in and out of view as he passed trees, but it didn't disappear. When he got near to him, the boy didn't move or look up. "Mind if I sit down?" "No," the boy said, still looking downward. Philip sat down. The boy kept kicking his legs. His face was nearly expressionless, with just a hint of a forlorn look. His white skin contrasted sharply with his dark eyes lurking below jet black hair that lay uncombed on his head. "Why are you sitting here?" "I'm waiting for my dad," he said. "Where is he?" "Just over there." The boy pointed down the path with a pale hand. No one was there. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes smoldered as he looked up at Philip from beneath his brow. "Billy." He faced the ground again. Relieved that the boy had such a normal, friendly name, Philip waited for him to reciprocate the question, and when he didn't, he said, "Mine's Philip." Then, "It's pretty cold out. What are you doing here?" "We're here a lot. We like going around the pond." "Where do you live?" The boy looked up again. The forlornness had given way to a cold menace. He said, "There's my dad." A man was walking slowly along the path, beyond the swampy area, obscured by trees. "You can go." "Why don't I wait with you?" "No, you better go." The boy said this with a finality that made Philip stand up and walk away without thinking, which was just as well with him. The man's slow, lumbering gait and the way his head swung back and forth made Philip's shoulders, neck, and scalp tingle. He walked quickly, careful not to run so as not to provoke the man, but it was too fast to turn back and see what they were doing. When he was about halfway to the junction with the main path, he stopped and checked behind him. The boy and his father had not followed. He breathed out a purse of tension, but as he turned to go, he saw that same blue object some way off the path. It was a sheet of some kind. Looking harder, he could see it was part of a tent. He took a few tentative steps into the woods for a better look. Had it been there as he walked in? He should have seen it. He wasn't sure if it was the same blue thing he had seen before. It wasn't near the same place. His heart was pounding again. He could practically hear his friends and parents telling him to get out of there. Every step sounded like ripping up 1,000 newspapers. The tent was faded, leaning awkwardly, and had no footprints near it or any sign of a fire. The tent was partly unzipped. Philip approached. He peeked in and saw an old, tattered sleeping bag and some crumpled clothes along with a box of food that looked like an animal had gotten into it. He sighed, then decided to go back. That's when the tingling feeling came back 10 times stronger. Someone was staring at him from the path. He had white, scraggly hair and wore grungy jeans, a winter hat, and a tattered parka. "Get away from my tent," he shouted. Philip dashed into the woods and kept running until he regained the composure to go in the general direction of the main path. He slowed down enough to look back, and he saw the man had gone to his tent and was watching him, but not following. He pressed forward through the brambles with urgency, but without panic. But when he crashed onto the main path, He broke into a sprint and jumped clear over the fallen tree. He kept thinking he could hear someone running behind him, but when he glanced back, there was never anyone there. He didn't stop running even when he got to the street. Eli and Cole were just down the road, and he ran straight past them. "Hey, wait," yelled Cole. "Philip!" Philip stopped, winded. "What happened?" Philip told them as clearly as he could as he gasped for air. They went to the path to look down it. There was nothing there but trees. "I knew that place was freaky," said Eli. "You guys just got here, right?" said Philip. "Yeah, pretty much." "It felt like a day in there." "You better not go back," said Eli. "I sure won't. Don't tell your parents, though, right?" "You sure?" "Yes, come on. I don't want to get in trouble." "What about that guy in there? What if he attacks someone?" "We can tell the kids not to go in there," he said. "But they're supposed to know. Let's just not tell our parents." "We could call the police," said Cole. He was the first one of them to have a cell phone. "Look, he didn't actually do anything. I'm sure the police know about him. It's their job." Cole and Eli reluctantly promised, but on the inside, they didn't want to tell either. They'd be embarrassed to go call the police if it turned out to be nothing. And who knew if Philip just got scared and was exaggerating the whole thing? For the next week, they passed the shortcut without looking at it or even referring to it. But in their minds, a conversation was going on. A conversation that Cole suddenly set into motion. "You know, maybe we should go in together sometime. We'll just see if that guy is still there." Philip's jaw dropped. Eli said, "Are you crazy? With all three of us, we'll be fine. And I have my cell phone." "I don't know, maybe tomorrow," said Philip. "Maybe never," said Eli. At school, Philip tried to get information about the woods out of his teachers. He tried to be discreet. He would work it into the conversation, saying things like, "Do baseballs ever go into that woods? Do people go and get them?" He could never get any real information, though. The teachers would all say basically the same thing, that it was best not to go in there, and that you never know who might be there. All except one, the librarian, Mrs. Muggs. They didn't even try with her, though. She was, in the minds of the students, in her own category. Not really a teacher, not really an adult, just Mrs. Muggs. She was the oldest teacher in the school, and she was very unobtrusive, so they almost saw her as an apparition. They never saw her talking to other teachers, or anywhere else but the library. People never checked books out anymore, and they behaved around her like she was a piece of furniture. Students would talk about kid things right in front of her, as if she weren't there. Things they would never say in front of other adults. And when they did, word never spread. Her status as a relict also gave her credibility, however. She was a sage, a village priestess who guarded the town's lore, a council who was very easy to talk to. A conversation with her slipped into being so easily that it was impossible to say when it began or ended. So when she appeared at Philip's shoulder to say, "Philip, you should stay out of that woods," he replied as if they had been conversing all morning. "I know, but I'm curious. And what's so bad anyway? Nothing bad has happened so far." He wasn't challenging her. He was just stating his mind. He was honestly open to any answer. "There's a lot of pain in there." "What kind of pain?" I shouldn't say. You'll just think I'm an old lady with batty ideas. No, I won't. You saw someone, didn't you? Yes, there was this weird old guy with a tent. You saw the boy. Philip stiffened slightly. How did you know? You and Cole were talking about it right here in front of me yesterday. Wait, what? We just said it? You act as though I'm invisible. Philip coughed in disbelief. He had indeed been talking to Cole about the incident, but he didn't remember Mrs. Muggs being there at all. I'm sorry, he said. That's okay, Philip. I learn a lot of secrets around here. No one thinks of me, but I'm always listening. Why is there pain? That boy came to a bad end. Came to a bad end? What do you mean? He was fine. Kind of creepy, but fine. The boy, he drowned in that pond many years ago. He's some would say ghost, but he could be a real boy. It's possible. What did he look like? He had black hair and really dark eyes, and his skin was bony white. He was wearing all black, too. As he said that, he noticed that Mrs. Muggs had black hair and very dark eyes as well. Did you see his father? Yes, he looked the same. Black hair, all of it. We saw both of them there another time before that, too. Who is we? My two friends. But what is this about? Now that you've seen them, I suppose I'll have to tell you. They went swimming, and the father stopped paying attention, just for a moment. Or maybe longer than a moment, but that's what he said. The boy got sucked into the shaft by the dam and drowned. You mean that drain? It's called a shaft spillway. She took Philip to a computer and looked up pictures of them online. There were many different shapes and sizes, but they all looked like the one at the pond. Did the father drown? No, but he blamed himself for his son's death, of course. And he went back there and... She whispered, killed himself. He tied rocks to his legs and tumbled off a little boat. And what no one will say is that he stabbed himself in the stomach, too, to bring death on quicker. So we saw their ghosts? I'm afraid to say I think you did. It's best to leave them alone. What about that other guy with the tent? Who was he? Was he a ghost? That's the thing about that woods. There really are strangers in there. That's probably one of them, but he's not a ghost. He may be harmless. He may not be. And it's best not to find out. But Philip, when it comes to the man and his son, there's a legend that anyone who sees that boy will drown. Consider yourself lucky you are still here. For a brief moment, her face took on the look of menace he had seen in the boy. Philip dragged his feet back to class. He met Cole outside the school that afternoon. Where's Eli? He said. He was just here, but he went to walk the path. What? Why? He said he wanted to prove himself. You thought he was a coward. Also, I kind of said something like that while we were waiting. We have to go get him. What? Said Cole. But Philip was already running. Cole followed. They went straight to the pond. Cole kept asking why they were running in there, but gave up after a while. They reached the pond. Eli was nowhere in sight. Cole, I think there's a ghost in here. That kid and his father are ghosts, and they want to kill Eli. Wait, we can't wait. We have to find him." They called his name as they went down the path, with no response. They went past the dam onto the part of the path they had never seen. It was mostly boardwalk on that side. Philip kept looking at the pond. They got all the way around, and Philip said, "Call the police on your phone. I bet he's in that pond." "How do you know? Maybe he didn't even come to the pond and went home." "No, he's in the pond. I know it. That kid we saw? Mrs. Muggs said it's a ghost, and if you see it, you'll drown. I bet he's down there." The police came out and searched the woods. The only person they found was the guy with the tent, and they took him in for questioning. With no sign of Eli there, or at home, or anywhere, they dredged the pond. And they found Eli, drowned, with rocks tied to his ankles. The town was stirred up like angry bees. The homeless guy they had found was everyone's biggest suspect. He had many previous counts of vagrancy, trespassing, petty theft, and drugs, which was enough to hold him without bail for a while, and there were calls to try him for murder. The fact that he refused to talk to the police only made him look more guilty in the eyes of the town. Big signs were put on both sides of the path. "Keep out on penalty of fine or imprisonment." There was talk of fencing off the whole area. And of course, all the children were told at home and at school to keep out of there. The problem was, there was no evidence the man had done anything to Eli. Also, he had been in the hospital with respiratory distress for an entire 36-hour period around the time of Eli's death. Memories of the drowning deaths of the man and the boy resurfaced, but not the way Mrs. Muggs told it, only in the form of a suspicion that a vagrant might have done it. The legend about seeing the boy was not mentioned at all. But everyone was even more afraid of the woods, and even angrier with their one suspect. Many said he should be put in jail for life, and openly hoped he would be killed in prison. A judge ruled his no bail status would be extended until trial. Philip felt like the only sane person in town. To him, it was obvious that the ghost had killed Eli, and he said so, but he was brushed off. One thing he knew for sure was that the homeless guy had not killed Eli. He knew it in his gut, but he could also see that it was impossible. The vagrant was scary, to be sure, but Philip remembered that though he had been yelled at by the man had not chased him. He merely defended his tent. He probably could have sneaked up behind Philip and stabbed him if he wanted. Also, when Philip saw him on the news, he thought his face bore the markings of wildness, even violence, but not of evil. He feared more than ever for himself and for Cole. They had both seen the boy. Perhaps he and Cole, much like the vagrant, were simply awaiting an inescapable fate. Philip went to Mrs. Muggs. "Why didn't you say anything to the police about the legend?" "I did, Philip. I tried to tell the investigators, and they thought I was a batty old woman. That's why all the people who were here when the two of them died kept quiet. They are afraid of what people would say." "But who cares, Mrs. Muggs, if it's the truth? The very people who know it's true would ridicule them the most harshly." "They didn't listen to you either, did they? And I'm afraid that homeless man is going to be blamed, even if he's not found not guilty. When a mob has reached a consensus, Philip, its mind cannot be changed." But this will just happen again. It may. I think it will keep happening until the haunting is ended. How can that happen? Can I end it? That's one thing I don't have an answer to, nor can I find it in all the libraries in the world. Some things are not written. As school ended and summer vacation began, with everyone running amok around the neighborhood, Philip thought more and more that he had to find a way to end the haunting. The news and the signs and the barriers they had put across the path scared the neighborhood kids for a while, but they were getting curious. To Philip, the fact that the adults were not making the area into a park and getting it cleared and patrolled was proof that they knew in their hearts that the legend was real, even if they wouldn't talk about it. He couldn't figure out why still nothing had happened to him or Cole. Was it just that they had not gone in there alone, like Eli? But he had gone in alone and was still alive. Was there something special about him? He wondered if it was just that he hadn't been afraid of Billy. He had said hello to him. What if Eli had seen him and had run away? Perhaps that had provoked the man. Or perhaps Billy had gotten mad at Eli. Philip could come to no conclusions, but decided to go into the woods, plan or not. He would just use his instinct. That's all he had done before. But as soon as he decided, he was unsure again. Wasn't it the instinct to act tough that had made him go in the first place? If he'd just stayed out of there like he'd been told, none of this would have happened. He was tormented by the conflicting thoughts, and he even searched the internet for advice, to no avail. Finally, Mrs. Muggs's words came back to him. Some things are not written. He confronted his parents about the legend one day at dinner, and he purposely did it without warning. What's the real reason you always told us to stay out of the woods? It's dangerous in there, said his mother. Look what happened to Eli. But Eli drowned. You said it was strangers we had to worry about, and that vagrant did not kill Eli. You know it as well as I do. The courts will decide, she said. Her voice was harsh, not with anger, but fear. Do you think Eli tied those rocks to his own feet? No, but the homeless guy didn't do it. It's impossible. He was in a hospital. You are lying to me. Don't talk to your mother like that, said his father, rising partly from his seat. Mom and Dad, just tell me the real reason. It's because of that boy you drowned a long time ago, isn't it? His mother looked at his father. He said, Where did you hear that? Mrs. Muggs told me. Mrs. Muggs is very old. She may be misremembering things. Stop avoiding the question. All right, said his dad. A boy did drown there. That was 20 years ago. Everyone in town thought it was best not to scare the children too much, so we just agreed to say there were strangers. That's the whole truth? Is it? His father shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Then the boy's father went and drowned himself. We didn't want to tell upsetting stories to you, so we left that out. And then everyone just kept leaving it out. So we just, almost at a whisper, Philip said, So you just kept lying and lying. We didn't lie. We just... Where did the man and his son live? His father sighed deeply. They lived with Mrs. Muggs. She was the grandmother. Now Philip's head was spinning. Mrs. Muggs had lied too? Was everything he'd been told a lie? He left the table and did not come back downstairs. Philip couldn't sleep. Everyone had lied, and all with lies of omission. Was he supposed to go around like Sherlock Holmes all the time? After many hours of staring at the ceiling in bed and rolling back and forth, Philip stated a few things to himself plainly. He and Cole had been riding the bus every day since Eli's disappearance, and it made Philip feel like a coward. The neighborhood children, especially the youngest ones, had started going into the head of the trail and peering down it. Sometimes they dared each other to take 1 or 2 steps, or 3, past the gate. It was only a matter of time before something happened. So it was simple. Philip would have to go into the woods and find the boy. The next day, he went straight to the pond. No one was there. No vagrants, children, no one. There were no footsteps in the leaves. It got cloudy all of a sudden and started drizzling. As he reached the pond, he saw Billy standing off to the left of the path. Philip's breath quickened, but he pretended to be calm. "Hi, Billy." Billy smiled. "Want to walk around the pond?" "Sure." Billy led Philip clockwise around the pond. He pointed at trees as they went, naming their species. He pointed at the water and said, "That's a mallard duck." The thing was, there was nothing in the water, no duck at all. Billy did this more than once, and he also pointed out a small boat tied to a tree. "That's our rowboat." But the boat wasn't there either. Philip just kept following and saying, "Yeah." About halfway around the pond, where it was still a marsh, there was a raised area of dry land a short way into the woods. "That's where we live, right there. Do you see our house?" Philip saw nothing but some scrub and a few trees, but he said, "Yes." They continued to the dam. Billy picked up a stick and said, "This is what you do." He threw it into the shaft, and then they watched it come out on the other side. He did this a few times, and Philip joined in. "You can't go in there," Billy said. "If you do, you'll die." He threw another stick, and Philip did the same. Then Billy said, "Let's sit down." They sat on the same log where they had been before. Billy put his hands under his legs and kicked his feet. They said nothing. After a few minutes, Billy said, "You better go. My dad is coming." As before, Philip could see the dad walking slowly along the path. So he got up and said goodbye. He gave a small wave. Then the boy said, "Really, you better go." Philip went home quickly and without trouble. Philip lay awake again, trying to figure out what to do. But this time it was easier. He knew that at the end of his ruminations, he would decide he had to go back. So instead of worrying about it, he simply went to sleep. He awoke refreshed and without fear, and he marched into the woods with confidence. But he saw nothing. He walked all the way around the pond on the way to school and back, and there was no sign of Billy. He had trouble believing the haunting was over, but if Billy stopped coming, maybe it was. He would have to keep going back to be sure. He had told Cole nothing about what had happened, and he thought he would keep it that way. He and Cole had not been talking very much since Eli had died. Now that he wasn't riding the bus again, he barely saw him. He thought of going to Mrs. Muggs, but decided not to. He was mad at her, but he also thought she may have held back that she was the grandmother on purpose. If he was still interested in the ghosts, he would figure that out anyway. That didn't completely explain it, but she must have had some good reason. Perhaps she thought Philip wouldn't believe her. After a few more days and a few more trips, The leaves were finally breaking out, and Philip started thinking it really was over. But one day, as Philip neared the junction, a cold wind came up and it started to drizzle. This time, Philip was sure he would see Billy. He was in the same place on the path he had been the last time, and Billy again asked him to follow. Step by step, Billy did exactly the same things he had done before. He pointed out trees, the ducks that weren't there, the boat, his house. He showed him how to throw sticks into the shaft, sat down, and finally said, "You better go. My dad is coming." And Philip left. That day, he had been comfortable with Billy. He wasn't scared, although he also wasn't sure if the father was a danger or not. Over the next weeks, the same thing happened again and again, always the same way. One day, Philip broke the routine. "Where's your mom?" he said. "She died when I was born." "Where's your grandma?" "At home." "Across the pond?" "No, home. Across the pond is where we live now. But we really live with her." Billy knotted his brow in confusion. "Who is she?" Billy looked at him from beneath his brow. "She's my grandma. She's the librarian." "Why do you live here now?" Billy started to giggle. He looked at Philip and then started laughing so hard he had to lean over. As Philip watched, the giggling turned to crying, and he looked up. Billy said, "Come tomorrow. I'll show you. But you better run away then and not come back." The hint of menace returned to Billy's face. "You better go. My dad is coming." Philip couldn't think about anything else all night long. He decided he would have to tell Cole about it. It could be his last chance. He went to his house after school and invited himself in just like he used to. Cole didn't object, but he wasn't very friendly either. "I saw that boy again, a few times." "You're still talking about that kid? Who is he?" He's actually a ghost." Cole went silent. Then he said, "Let's go play on my Xbox." He turned around and went to the TV room. When Philip got there, he was already playing, and he couldn't get Cole to stop long enough to have a conversation. If Philip brought Billy up, he would avoid the question. Philip was not just confused, but angry with Cole. He felt betrayed. For some reason, Cole wanted to block out the whole subject. Whatever Philip tried, he couldn't get his attention, and he eventually went home. "I'll see you," said Cole. He didn't even look up from the game console. To Philip, it sounded a little like they were parting ways forever. "You can't just ignore this," said Philip in a final attempt at reason. "Yeah, see you then." Philip turned to go, but stopped. "Cole, if anything happens to me tomorrow, you can have my stuff." Cole glanced up, but only for a second. "Cool. You can have my stuff too." Philip saw himself out the door. The next day he went to the pond, and as usual, the wind kicked up and it began to drizzle. Billy was in the same place as usual, but he waved Philip to follow him in the other direction, counterclockwise, to the place where it said, "No swimming." Billy took his clothes off, piled them neatly on the shore, and then turned to Philip. He whispered, "Just watch." He ran into the water and splashed around. He got deeper, then doggy paddled out toward the middle of the pond. Philip was already figuring out what was about to happen. Billy stopped, then lost forward motion, and paddled and splashed without effect. "Billy," he shouted, "come back." Billy struggled, then started flailing, his arms going up and down, his face coming up to gasp for air before submerging again. Philip couldn't stand to just watch. He kicked his shoes off and ran in, banging his elbow on the sign, and then swam out against the pull of his wet clothes. Billy's head was below the surface, but he grabbed his arm and pulled him up. Billy was in a panic and grabbed Philip around the neck. This would have pulled him under if he hadn't been so much bigger. Philip got him under the armpits. Billy kept struggling, but Philip was able to inch toward shore. The problem was, there was a slow current taking them toward the shaft. It was not strong, but Philip's progress was slow, and they got closer and closer to it, along with the little flecks of detritus. Philip thought how strange the contrast was between their panic and the lazy flow of the water. They drifted up to the shaft. Alone, Billy would have been swept over the top of the cement, but Philip was able to push Billy on top of it while keeping a grip on one arm. Billy was shivering uncontrollably. Holding tight to Billy's arm, Philip struggled on to the top of the shaft. He managed to stand up, the water going around his ankles and into the black void. Without the little step-like bevels in the funnel, he would have slipped in immediately, but he was still having trouble keeping his footing. They were about 4 feet from the dam where the path crossed, and he picked Billy up by a hand and an ankle, and throwing all his weight into it, heaved him over onto the path. As he did, he lost his balance and tottered backward. He threw his feet back into the shaft, and in so doing was able to throw his arms over the top and hang on. He was shivering too, and his fingers were not moving well, but with a final effort, he dragged himself to the top, stood up, and jumped as far as he could toward the dam. He splashed into the water at the base of it and clambered up. Billy was lying, silent and still, on the path. Philip slapped his face a few times. He didn't know anything about CPR, but he thought he should try to get the water out of his lungs. He turned Billy on his side and slapped his chest and back. Water came out, and miraculously, Billy coughed and sat up. That turned into a coughing fit that lasted a few minutes. But he was breathing. He was shivering violently. Philip didn't know to bear hug him to warm him up, but he rubbed Billy's back. "You weren't supposed to do that," Billy said, hardly able to speak through blue lips. But his eyes widened suddenly, and he said, "You better go. My dad is coming." At that moment, a pair of old black boots placed themselves in Philip's field of vision. Looking up, he saw black pants, a black jacket, and finally a white face, pale as snow. It was Philip's father. His face was angry. He picked Billy up and looked into his eyes. "I'm okay," Billy said. "I didn't drown." The father turned his face slowly toward Philip. He had the same jet-black hair and dark eyes. His teeth were white as china, but they had blood on them. He stared for what seemed like an eternity. His mouth opened slowly as if to form a word, but instead, he nodded slowly and made a deep, gravelly groan. He turned and walked back the way he'd come, carrying Billy. Philip felt the blood pounding in his neck, but he didn't run. He walked calmly back to the sign and squeezed his wet shoes back on. Philip's clothes were still there, so he carried them around to Billy's little island and left them there. Then he wandered back and forth along the now sunny main path until his clothes were dry. And that's why you came to see us. Mr. Turpey, the lawyer, was sitting uncomfortably in a padded chair. It was too small for his corpulent body. Philip was to his left in his own chair, his hands on the armrests, and next to Philip was his father, leaning forward. "It's the right thing to do," said Philip. I see. That's very admirable. The thing is, Philip, there's been a lot of emotion wrapped up in this case, and we already have what we need, an alibi. Mr. Shaw was in the hospital at the time of Eli's death. That's an incontrovertible fact, and it can't be ignored. Philip's father said, "This case never should have been brought to trial." Mr. Turpey put his hand up. "Agreed. But what I mean to say is that I don't think your testimony can add anything. I just wanted to tell them he couldn't have killed Eli." "Yes, I understand, and for good reason. Mr. Shaw saw you at his tent." He leaned forward with widened eyes, prompting Philip to answer. "Yes." "And he shouted at you?" "Yes." "And he chased you away?" "No. He didn't chase me. I ran away, and he just went to his tent. He could have killed me too, but he didn't." "Yes, Philip. Now, the problem here is that you said he could have killed you too. That implies that you had knowledge that he killed Eli." "That's not what I meant." "Yes, I know, but a prosecuting attorney will use that little word to cast doubt on our case. And any other little thing like it. He's not your friend. Do you think you could get through a long cross-examination without any little slip-ups like that?" Philip looked down. "The other thing is," Mr. Turpey's eyes darted back and forth as he searched for words, "you can't start talking about ghosts. The other lawyer will know that you've said something about ghosts and will ask you. If you say that a ghost did it, it'll look silly. It'll take the jury's focus off the facts. It's not germane to the case." Philip looked at him quizzically. "It's not relevant. It doesn't matter to the case." Philip's father spoke again. "They shouldn't even ask about the ghost or the legend for that very reason." "No, but they will. And I'll object, and it will be taken off the record. But what's said is said. We have two things going for us. One is the facts. The other is that Mr. Shaw would not talk to the police until he talked to a lawyer. You could learn something from that, Philip. You don't have to worry about it until you're 18. But when they come a-knocking, don't answer any questions until you have talked to your lawyer, no matter how innocent you are." "But if I'm innocent, how can telling the truth get me in trouble?" "I don't think you were listening, Philip. The more you talk, the more opportunity there is to make you look bad." "Why would they do that?" "They don't know who did things when they are questioning people. They just want evidence, and between them and the lawyers, they will try to make you look guilty. The facts turn into fables. Since Mr. Shaw said nothing, I was able to come in and find out the facts. And that's all we'll need." Philip stared down. "Let's go, Philip," said his father. Mr. Turpey said, "I'll tell you what. Put your story down into an email and send it to me. Make sure it's your own words, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'll have my secretary put it on official letterhead, and you can sign it. Then if we need it, we have it. But I don't think you should worry, Philip. Mr. Shaw isn't going to prison. I wouldn't be there to give him a hug when they let him out. Let's not forget he's a rough character. But you won't have to worry about him. Philip went back to the pond many more times that summer and never saw any sign of Billy. He was sure in his heart that things were back to normal. He saw neighborhood kids go into the woods and come back safe and sound. The homeless guy, Mr. Shaw, was set free, and no one ever saw him again. Philip didn't tell anyone how he saved Billy, not even Cole. Now that it was over, there was no reason to get everyone scared about the legend again. Perhaps some things are better left unsaid, he thought. Cole eventually went with him into the woods, and they started going to the pond every once in a while. They would talk a little about Eli, and Philip was always sure to throw a few sticks down the shaft. Philip did see Billy one final time. It was on a cloudy, cold day in December, and he was on the path alone. The sun came out strongly all of a sudden, and it felt like spring. On the log by the dam sat Billy, who stood up when he saw Philip from afar. His hair was black and his eyes dark, but his face was pink and healthy. He gave Philip a wave and a smile, and then he ran off into the woods.